the sun was bright above the golden towers of Solara Palace. The streets below were filled with people waving blue and silver flags as Queen Leora's carriage passed through. It was the Festival of Unity, a day to celebrate peace after long years of unrest. Flowers were scattered in the air, children laughed, and music filled every corner of the city. The queen smiled from her carriage, dressed in a light gown the color of dawn. Her people adored her. She was young, kind, and full of hope for the Empire's future. Marching beside the royal carriage was Captain Ethan Cross, a soldier known for his quiet discipline. He had guarded the queen for only a few months, but his loyalty was already the subject of whispers among other guards. He was not the most decorated officer, nor the loudest, but he never failed in his duty, noticed every sound, every shadow that moved where it should not. As the parade rolled through the great square, Ethan's eyes kept moving. The cheers of the crowd were loud, but his senses told him something was off. He had grown up in the frontier colonies, where silence could hide danger. That instinct did not fade, even in the heart of the capital. A group of men were standing near a marble archway. It was clapped with honest smiles, but one man kept his hand deep inside his cloak. Ethan's heart quickened. The music of the parade swelled, and at that exact moment, the man lifted his arm. A thin silver arrow shot through the air, almost invisible in the sunlight. Time seemed to slow. Ethan heard it cut the wind, saw its glint aimed straight for the queen's chest. Without thinking, he moved. He lunged toward her, catching her shoulder just as the arrow reached. He pulled her down, turning his own body to shield her. The arrow struck deep into his shoulder near the neck. He felt a hot pain that burned and spread through him, but he stayed on his feet long enough to see her safe. The royal guards rushed forward, forming a wall around the queen. Someone caught the assassin before he could escape, but their victory felt far away. Ethan fell to one knee, trying to draw a full breath. His vision flickered as the queen's face appeared before him. Her eyes were wide, filled with fear and shock. She held his arm as if she could keep him from slipping away. Blood darkened his uniform. The arrow's head glowed faintly violet, and one of the guards gasped that it was coated in poison. Ethan barely heard. His focus stayed on the queen's face. "Are you safe, Your Majesty?" he asked, voice rough and fading. She nodded, tears threatening to spill. "Do not speak," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Then I did my job." His knees gave way, and he fell to the stones. The guards lifted him at once and carried him inside the palace while the queen followed close. The doctors were summoned, the door sealed, and the city's shouts grew distant behind them. Inside the royal healing chamber, the physicians worked fast. They removed the arrow and poured a glowing antidote over the wound, but the poison had already traveled. Queen Leora stood nearby, refusing to leave. The chief doctor bowed and pleaded with her to rest, yet she shook her head. "He took a wound meant for me. I will not rest while he fights for breath," she said firmly. Hours passed as the light outside shifted from gold to red, then to the gray of night. The palace halls were silent, except for the murmurs of prayer. Ethan tossed on the bed, his skin pale, his life hanging by a thread. The healers could do little more. The poison was unlike anything seen before. Late in the night, when most of the staff had stepped out to mix new medicines, the queen sat beside him. She looked at his still form and felt a weight deeper than fear. This soldier, barely known to her, had placed his life in front of hers without hesitation. She could not understand why someone born in the shadows of the colonies would show such courage for a queen. She took his hand gently. "You saved me," she whispered. "But you cannot go yet, Ethan. Solara still needs you. I need you." Her words vanished into the quiet room. Outside the windows, lights flickered as the city kept its long vigil. Some prayed for their queen's safety, others for the brave soldier who had taken the poisoned arrow. As the first light of dawn touched the palace walls, Ethan's breathing grew steadier. The poison still coursed through him, but something deep within him resisted at some force stronger than pain itself. The queen's eyes brightened with relief. She stood by the window and saw the rising sun wash the city in gold. For the first time in her reign, she realized that one act of courage could change the heart of a kingdom. Ethan Cross had saved her life. But before long, she would discover that he had also changed it forever. Days passed after the attack, and the palace grounds were covered with silence. The people of Solara waited for news about the brave soldier who had saved their queen, Stories about him spread through every street. Children played pretending to be the guard who caught an arrow, and merchants told travelers about his courage. His name had become a legend, but inside the palace, the truth was quieter and full of worry.
Captain.
Ethan lay in a wide bed, made of white glass and silver threads. The light around him changed with the hours, soft blue in the morning, warm orange at evening. His face was pale and his breath uneven. The poison had touched his blood in ways the doctors did not understand. Every few hours, a healer came to rub medicine into his skin, to whisper codes into the machines that tried to clean his blood. Queen Leora visited him every day. She never entered with guards or attendants. She came quietly, covered with a plain robe so no one would notice her at night. She sat beside him and watched the slow rhythm of his breathing. Sometimes she talked, telling him about her meetings, her duties, or simple moments from her childhood. She spoke as if he could hear her, as if her voice could call him back from the edge between life and death. One night after a long meeting with her council, she went again to his chamber. The hallways were dark except for the faint light of wall lamps. Outside, a soft rain fell on the palace roofs. She stood beside his bed and closed her eyes for a moment. She had always been strong in front of her people, but alone in that room, she felt more human than queen. "You should be standing out there in the sunshine," she said softly, looking at his still face. "You were meant to live, not to fade away in this quiet room." Her hand brushed his arm. His skin felt cold, but alive. Ethan's mind floated in a fog. He could not move or speak, but somewhere deep inside he heard her voice like a faint echo. It gave him something to hold on to. Through dreams, he saw flashes of light, of people calling his name, of the queen's face leaning over him with tears in her eyes. Wanted to tell her he was still fighting. The next morning, one of the healers shouted with surprise. Ethan's pulse had grown stronger. The poison seemed to stop spreading. The doctor sent word up the golden stairs to the queen's chamber. When Leora arrived, breathless from running, the healer greeted her with a smile. "He is fighting back, Your Majesty," the man said. She stepped close and saw that Ethan's eyes were open, though weak and unfocused. When he noticed her standing there, he tried to speak, but only a small sound came out. She bent close and took his hand. "Do not try to talk," she said. "You are safe. Just rest." Ethan smiled faintly. His lips moved again, and she heard him whisper, "Are you safe?" Her chest tightened. He had been poisoned, nearly dead, and this was his first thought. She nodded quickly, feeling tears she had promised herself she would never show. "Yes, Ethan," she said. "I am safe because of you." He closed his eyes, still holding her hand. "Good," he breathed out, then fell into a deep sleep again. From that day on, he began to recover little by little. Each night the healers reported better signs. The queen never missed a single visit. She even learned from the doctors how to prepare some of the herbal drinks he needed. When no one was looking, she brought them herself. The guard on duty outside the chamber often heard her quiet laughter late at night. It was a soft sound, one that had been missing from the palace for years. Ethan sometimes woke to find her reading beside his bed, her hair loose, her crown forgotten. He could not imagine that the same woman who ruled over an empire would care so much for a soldier like him. As the days turned to weeks, his wound began to close, leaving a thin scar over his shoulder. He could move his arm again, and even stand with help. Whenever the queen entered the room, he tried to rise, but she stopped him every time. "You saved me once," she said with a smile. "Now you will let me return the favor." The connection between them grew in quiet ways that no one else could see. It was not spoken aloud in grand words, but it was there in every look they shared, in every moment of silence that felt peaceful instead of awkward. Outside, the people of Solara continued to cheer for their queen, never guessing that behind the tall palace walls, two hearts had begun to change. Ethan did not yet understand that his act of duty had woven his life into hers forever, and the queen, who had spent her life surrounded by power and fear, began to realize that true strength sometimes came not from crowns or swords, but from the courage of a single heart that refused to let go. The palace gates opened again to music and bright sunlight. After many weeks, Captain Ethan Cross was able to walk outside with help from the guards. His shoulder still ached when he lifted his arm too high, but the poison was gone, and his strength was slowly returning. The people welcomed him like a hero. Everywhere he went, children waved and called his name. Some even ran beside him, holding small wooden arrows painted silver, pretending to save their own queens. Queen Leora stood on the balcony, watching the crowd cheer for him. She felt pride mixed with something softer in her heart. When the attack had happened, she had feared for her life. Now, she feared something different. She feared what she felt for the man who had saved her. She was the ruler of Solara, a woman raised with duty written on every page of her life, and yet she found herself waiting for the sound of Ethan's footsteps more than the sound of her counsel's advice. Later that evening, she invited him to walk with her in the palace gardens. The night was calm. Fountains whispered among pale flowers that glowed softly under hanging lights. Ethan felt awkward at first. He was dressed in his uniform, neat but simple, while she wore a light ivory gown that shimmered like water. She moved without guards, something rare for a queen, and that made him nervous. "Your Majesty," he said, keeping his voice low, "the gardens are not fully secure at night. It might be unsafe." She turned to him with a half-smile. "Ethan, I think I have had enough danger for one lifetime. Tonight I just want to walk." He wanted to protest, but her tone left no room for argument. They walked side by side along the stone path. The cool air carried the scent of roses and sweet herbs. For a while neither spoke. Then the queen asked, "Do you ever think of leaving the army?" Ethan looked ahead at the fountains. "I would not know what else to do," he said honestly. "The army saved me from the streets when I had nothing. It gave me purpose." Leora nodded slowly. "And do you still believe it is your only purpose?" He frowned, not sure how to answer. "It is what I'm good at. Protecting others is what I do best." She looked at him thoughtfully. "You did that better than anyone," she said quietly. "You did not only protect me, Ethan. You gave my people back their faith and loyalty." He stopped walking and turned to her. "Your Majesty, I did what any soldier should. You owe me nothing." But she shook her head. "Maybe not debt, but I owe you understanding. You showed me what courage really means, not with words or crowns or ceremonies, but with your heart." For a moment, the sound of the fountains filled the silence between them. Ethan's heart beat faster. He had stood before enemy fire and never felt nervous, yet now, standing near her, he could barely speak. They continued walking. And soon the path brought them to the glass gardens of chamber, where vines grew around translucent walls that glowed with soft lights. It looked almost like a dream. The queen stepped inside and touched one of the flowers, its petals shining under her fingers. "When I was a child," she said, "I used to hide here. It was the only place where I did not have to be a ruler. I could just be Leora." Ethan smiled gently. "And I suppose I should thank this place. It gave us a chance to meet like this." She turned to him, surprised by his words. He looked away quickly, embarrassed that he had spoken too freely. "Forgive me, Your Majesty," he said quickly. "I was unbecoming." Her smile returned, warmer this time. "It was honest," she said. "And honesty is rare inside these walls." They stayed there longer than expected. They spoke of small things, his village, her love for the old stories, how both sometimes wished they could escape their duties for a single day. Leora found herself laughing more than she had in years. Ethan, who usually spoke little, forgot the distance between queen and soldier. When they finally returned to the main hall, the moon was high. Ethan bowed deeply. "Thank you for the walk, Your Majesty. It was an honor." She hesitated, then touched his shoulder lightly, just above the healed scar. "You should stop calling me Your Majesty when it is just us," she said softly. "Tonight, I was only Leora." He met her eyes, surprised. "Then good night, Leora," he said quietly. As he walked away, her heart beat faster than it should have. The walls of the great palace felt different that night, less cold, as if something had awakened within them. Outside, the city slept under bright stars, unaware that within those walls, Queen and her guard had begun to see each other not as ruler and protector, but as two lonely souls who had finally found peace in one another's company. The next morning, the Queen's advisors noticed that she smiled more easily. Some whispered that it was the aftermath of survival. Others guessed she was planning something bold. They did not know the truth, and perhaps it was better that way. For deep inside the Queen's heart, the thought of love had already taken root, quiet but certain, just like the vines that grew endless and unstoppable in her garden. The morning of the great celebration arrived, and the palace shone brighter than ever before. Flags waved from every tower, bells rang from the city squares, and crowds filled the streets. It was the day when peace across the kingdoms would finally be signed. After years of war and rebellion, the Empire of Solara would stand united again. Queen Leora looked out from her chamber balcony. The wind played with her hair, and sunlight glowed through the transparent curtains. Down below, music drifted from the courtyards. Her people were happy, and she should have felt the same. But her heart was restless. For days she had been turning one thought again and again in her mind until it became something she could no longer ignore. At the edge of the courtyard, Captain Ethan Cross stood in his formal uniform, his eyes scanning the area as always. Even in times of celebration, his instincts stayed sharp. He had been cleared for duty again, but his work now took him closer to the Queen than ever before. Her council had argued that such closeness broke tradition, but she had refused to listen. In her mind, tradition had lost some of its weight anyway. She had seen those who only followed rules without heart. Ethan was different. He had changed something in her that she could not easily explain. His loyalty was not to power or status, but to something purer, something human. By noon, the grand hall was filled with nobles, generals, foreign envoys, and servants carrying silver trays. Chandeliers sparkled like frozen stars above their heads. Queen Leora entered the hall to a roar of applause. Her gown was white with a gold sash over her shoulder. She moved with calm grace, but inside, her heartbeat raced. Behind her, Ethan followed her steps, every sense alert to any possible danger. The ceremony began with a speech about the bravery of soldiers, the unity of nations, and the promise of peace. Leora said the words expected of her, but her mind wandered toward the man standing at her side. When her turn came to speak freely, she paused longer than expected. The crowd grew silent. There was a moment, she began, her voice steady but full of emotion, when peace seemed only a dream. A single act of courage changed that dream into hope. Her eyes moved toward Ethan. He stood still, confused but attentive. She took a deep breath. The entire hall waited. "Many think that a ruler's power lies in command or birthright," she said. "But true strength lies in the courage to protect, in the honesty to care. Today, before you all, I wish to honor that strength. Captain Ethan Cross gave his life for mine, but he gave more than his life. He gave me a reason to see this throne not as power, but as service." Whispers spread across the crowd. Some looked puzzled, others uneasy. Leora continued, her voice firm now. "I will not marry for politics or treaties. I will not let others decide who stands at my side. I will choose for myself." A hush filled the hall as she turned to face Ethan directly. "Captain Ethan Cross," she said softly, though her words carried through the chamber. "You are the man who risked everything without asking for anything in return. You have my respect, my gratitude, and my heart. Will you stand beside me, not as a guard, but as my husband?" The words struck everyone still. The nobles gasped. The lords of foreign lands exchanged looks of shock. Even Ethan could not breathe for a moment. His thoughts blurred, as if time itself had stopped. He finally found his voice. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "you honor me more than I deserve. But I am only a soldier. The crown deserves someone greater, someone trained for this life." Leora's eyes softened, but shone with steady fire. "You stood between me and death without question," she said. "There is no greater nobility than that." The hall erupted into murmurs. Some shouted protests about tradition and bloodlines. An advisor rushed forward, bowing in panic, but one look from the Queen silenced him. Her choice was final. Ethan went down on one knee. He looked up at her, his heart pounding faster than it ever had on the battlefield. "If it is truly your wish," he said, "I will stand beside you, not as your duty, but because I already gave you my heart that day without realizing it." A wave of emotion swept through the hall. The guards, the servants, even the musicians stood frozen before the sight of their queen, holding out her hand to a soldier who had no title but the honor in his soul. She helped him rise, and for a long, silent moment, they looked at each other. The ceremony that had begun as a political treaty had turned into something far deeper. Outside, as the sunlight poured through the glass walls, The people of Solara cheered again, not because they understood every word that had been said, but because their queen smiled in a way she never had before. Her joy spread through the city like the first day of spring. That night, the whole empire glowed with celebration. But in the quiet of her private chambers, Leora stood beside Ethan by the window. The city lights glittered below like stars fallen to earth. She turned to him and said gently, "Do you regret standing in the way of that arrow?" He looked at her with a soft smile, not for a single breath. And under the great and endless sky of Solara, two hearts won crowned. One scarred finally stood as equals, ready to face whatever the dawn would bring. The world changed for Queen Leora and Captain Ethan Cross after that day. The palace, once filled with pride and careful silence, became alive with new voices and new hope. Some old nobles tried to protest, saying the marriage broke ancient customs, but their words faded when the people of Solara spoke louder. To the common folk, the queen's choice was not a scandal. It was a story that felt like their own story, where love and courage overcame power and greed. The wedding took place beneath the great silver dome of the capital's temple. Morning light poured through the high windows and touched the petals scattered across the white floor. Ethan wore the dark uniform of the royal guard, though without his medals. He had asked for none. Leora wore a simple gown made of silk that shimmered softly, but carried no crown. She wanted to stand before him not as a ruler, but as a woman. The ceremony lasted only a few minutes, but those minutes echoed through all of Solara's history. When Ethan placed his hand over hers, the people outside burst into cheers. Bells rang from every tower. The streets filled with music, food, and dancing that lasted until night. The queen had changed what it meant to rule, and her soldier had changed what it meant to serve. After the wedding, life in the palace took on a different rhythm. Ethan never liked being called king. He preferred to remain by her side as protector and partner. Many evenings they walked along the high walls watching the sun set across the city. She would laugh and tell him stories about her younger days in the palace, and he would listen, smiling quietly the way he always did. Sometimes he found it hard to believe that everything had truly happened. The same man who once guarded her from the crowd now shared her table and her future. Yet every time he looked at her, he did not see power or royalty. He saw the same woman who had once sat by his bedside, whispering to a half-conscious soldier that she needed him to live. Peace did not come easily to the empire, but it came all the same. Guided by their rule, Solara began to change. The war had left many wounds across the land, and rebuilding them demanded effort and time. Queen Leora often visited villages herself, walking among farmers and craftsmen. Ethan always followed a few steps behind, proud and silent, a steady shadow to her light. Once, during a long journey to a far town, a child ran up to Leora, carrying a flower. "My mother says you are brave," she said, handing it to the queen. Leora smiled and pointed to Ethan. "He is the one who taught me what real bravery looks like." The child turned to him and grinned, and the sight stayed with him long after they had left. Years passed. Rebellion that had once threatened the throne became only a memory told in stories. Ethan's scar remained on his shoulder, a faint reminder of the arrow that had begun everything. Whenever he touched it, it reminded him that one moment of pain had led him to a lifetime of meaning. On the morning of their 5th anniversary, the palace awoke to the sound of music again. The people of Solara called it the Day of the Shield, a holiday created to celebrate both the queen's wisdom and the captain's courage. Flowers filled the courtyards, and children marched with wooden shields painted blue and gold. Below them, the city lights flickered like 1,000 small suns. She leaned lightly against his shoulder. Do you ever wonder how different things might have been if you had not seen that arrow? She asked. He smiled. Then you might have ruled without interruption, and I would still be guarding you from a distance. She shook her head. No, she said softly. I think fate would have found another way. They stayed there quietly for a long time. The wind brushed past them, carrying faint laughter from below. Finally, Leora turned toward him. You know, she said, the world praises queens and warriors, but I think the truest heroes are those who keep believing in kindness when everything tries to harden them. Ethan nodded. And I suppose, Majesty, that you are the greatest hero I've ever known. She laughed under her breath and reached for his hand. And you, she said, will always be the reason this kingdom remembers what courage truly means. When night settled fully, the stars came out one by one. The city bells rang from the temples, echoing across the hills. The sound carried to every corner of the empire, a gentle reminder of how one act of selfless bravery had changed everything. Ethan looked across the city and felt peace rise in his chest. He had once thought bravery belonged only to battlefields. Now he knew it could also live in small moments, like a quiet promise, a shared smile, a gentle hand in the dark. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Leora rested her head on his shoulder. Together they watched the sunrise spill gold across their kingdom. Their story had begun with danger and fear, but it had ended in peace and love. Written not by the power of crowns, but by the strength of two simple hearts that never stopped believing in each other.